Hello and welcome to IB Times TV. I'm Marisa Christian. Today I'm joined by our resident tech guru, Dave Smith, to talk about the relationship between Apple's announcements, products, and release dates. Now, Dave, tell me a little bit about the research you recently did to predict the release of iOS 7 and the elusive iPhone 5S.
Sure. So when iOS 7 was unveiled earlier last month, everybody's been playing around with it, playing around with the beta software, but everybody wants to know when it was coming out. So I decided I'm going to try to do some math and try to figure out when this is going to happen. So I looked at history. I looked at the last couple of years and found when Apple would unveil the software versus when they would actually release the software to the public, and how much time they generally needed to get from beta to the public version of the software. So last year, Apple unveiled iOS 6 in early June, and then 100 days later, they released it to the public. So assuming the same time frame, Apple unveiled iOS 7 this year, early June. So 100 days later from them is, again, September, which is exactly when Apple released iOS 6 last year. So we can be safe to assume, or it's safe to assume that Apple will release iOS 7 in September. And 100 days, specifically after the unveiling date, is Wednesday, which is typically when Apple tends to unveil or release its iOS software. So we believe Apple's going to unveil iOS 7 on September 18th, which is a Wednesday.
Why do you think Apple times its releases so strategically? How does that help the brand?
Well, Apple and their software and their product releases are really something that's ingrained into the company culture. Ever since the first Macintosh, when Steve Jobs stood in front of his Mac team, at the time, he was in charge of the Mac team while the rest of the company was working on the Lisa computer. He was in charge of this Mac team, which he called like his pirates. These were the guys that were kind of the rebels of the company working on this Macintosh, a revolutionary product. And he ingrained into them at this retreat shortly before the unveiling of the Macintosh that real artists ship. And that was kind of the motto that the Mac team used from then on out. And since then, it's kind of become part of the company lore for all Mac products. Even though the Mac was going to be unveiled shortly after that retreat where Steve Jobs famously said real artists ship, the real chore was going to be making sure that the Mac would actually release on time. It was going to be unveiled, no problem, but actually getting it ready for the public was going to be a huge deal. And so he really convinced them that we have to be able to ship on time or else nobody's going to take us seriously as a company. So assuming that they stay very formulaic, and assuming that Tim Cook in his first 2 years since Steve Jobs has died doesn't want to change one of the most fundamental parts of Apple and release the software too much longer after it's been unveiled, we can fully expect iOS 7 release on this day, Wednesday, September 18th.
Now, quickly, just to wrap it up, what else has the Apple rumor mill brought up? I mean, I know something about an iWatch and a low-cost iPhone. Just quickly, what do they have? What is everybody talking about?
Sure. Well, first, the iPhone 5, the true successor to the iPhone 5, everybody's expecting, there's always at least one iPhone release every year. This will be the first year that there will be two iPhone releases, actually. The iPhone 5S, which is the flagship smartphone that everybody's expecting, the distinguishing feature being a fingerprint sensor that's embedded directly in the home button. Besides that, there have been lots of rumors about this low-cost iPhone, which a lot of people are calling the iPhone Lite. Some people are calling it iPhone 6 erroneously, but it's most likely going to be called iPhone Lite. Basically, it almost looks like an iPod Touch it's like an iPhone 5 mixed with an iPod Touch, mixed with the classic iPod. Like if you think about the form factor of the classic iPod, but with some of the curvature of the iPod Touch, basically what it's going to look like is an iPhone 5 from the front and an iPod Touch from the back that's a little sleek, but also made of plastic, mainly made of plastic. And this is going to be a really feature-basic phone that's really aimed at emerging markets like India and China, a lot of these markets that really can't afford these phones without carrier subsidies. Here in America, these phones cost $200, but that's because we have carriers that can help us pay for them in 2-year contracts. A lot of these countries like China and India don't have that, so the smartphone costs upwards of $600 American, which is even more expensive in those countries. So this phone is specifically aimed at introducing an iPhone experience to customers that is accessible. Besides that, we're expecting a couple of new iPads, including a follow-up to the full-size iPad, the successor to the iPad Mini. Those are probably coming in October. And people are still looking forward to the iWatch. There's been like a huge surge in iWatch-related news recently, where suddenly Apple is trademarking in all of these countries all of a sudden. Apple originally trademarked the term iWatch in Jamaica, of all places, and that was kind of under the radar. But only recently did they start trademarking iWatch in Japan and Turkey and Russia.
So it's coming.
It's coming, yeah, it's definitely coming. Earlier this year at the D11 conference in Rancho Palos Verdes, CEO Tim Cook talked in front of everybody about wearables as if this is going to happen. Usually, secrecy is one of the utmost principles at Apple, but Tim Cook was very open about talking about wearables, saying that, Google, a lot of people might find Google Glass something that's attractive, but it's going to appeal to only certain verticals. And he said there's a great opportunity for wearable technology, but specifically the wrist, which he finds extremely interesting because it is something that you can use. It's very accessible, but it's not there when you don't need it. It might disappear onto your wrist. So we're expecting the iWatch to be completed by November. We might see it released by December, so it gets in the holiday rush. But it might be released shortly after then. We don't know as far as the production goes. We haven't seen it at all. But we are expecting an unveiling later this year. So it's very exciting in terms of in the Apple world.
Well, very informative. Thank you so much, Dave.
My pleasure.